This is Donald Trump's house, brother.
She's a fake, a fraud. She's a pretender. Her and her pimp handlers will destroy our country.
I'm not going to do conspiracy, and I'm not going to do conspiracy.
Here we are in the final weeks, the closing message.
There's literally a floating island of garbage. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
It was ill-advised to have that kind of person there at that kind of rally.
We are being told through legacy media constantly that this is a holy war. This rhetoric of that Trump is Hitler and that all of his followers are Nazis. Like, that is very, very, very costly.
I hope we have a secure border, and I hope Donald Trump does bring more jobs back to this country, but I don't know what's going to happen, man.
The US election is 1 week away, and the country now feels divided over just about everything. There are two wildly different versions of reality depending on what you watch or who you follow. If you follow the Republican line, you just saw Trump give an election-winning speech to an historic movement of supporters inside a packed arena that is deep in his opponent's territory. Take the Democrat medicine, let's call it the blue pill. Well, then you saw this.
But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally, a rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within, who has threatened to use the troops to quell what he says are lawless cities, and to use those troops to carry out mass deportations of immigrants, is once again turning Madison Square Garden into a staging ground for extremism.
And that wasn't just a line from an excitable broadcaster on an openly far left-wing network. Vice presidential nominee Tim Walz said this.
Donald Trump has descended into madness over the last few weeks. And I think some of you don't miss on this. Go do your Google on this. Donald Trump's got this big rally going at Madison Square Garden. There's a direct parallel to a big rally that happened in the mid-1930s at Madison Square Garden. And don't think that he doesn't know for 1 second exactly what they're doing there.
If Tim Walz had done his Google on this, he'd have known that Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush all held election rallies at Madison Square Garden, which has also hosted the DNC many times. If Madison Square Garden is a direct parallel with the Nazis and Hitler, I've got some very sad news for anybody with tickets to see Cyndi Lauper there tomorrow night. And on the subject of alternative realities, Kamala Harris is now bizarrely arguing that Trump is going to take away people's guns.
For everybody, should he be president of the United States?
Okay.
Right? That's the question. Should he have the ability to sit behind the seal of the president of the United States when he says he wants to terminate the Constitution of the United States? You know what that would mean? In the Constitution of the United States is your Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure, your Fifth Amendment right, your Sixth Amendment right to an attorney.
Well, a lot of rights going to be gone. The First Amendment.
But the First Amendment, the Second Amendment.
Yes.
Look, I'm in favor of the Second Amendment. I don't believe we should be taking anybody's guns away.
I really don't think Donald Trump's going to be taking people's guns away. The Democrats flogged the democracy on the ballot line for a year and then quietly dropped it because it wasn't working. Voters are screaming that they're worried about the price of groceries, about jobs, about housing, and about border security, and about whether the Harris campaign really believes this attack line or not. The fact is that many people are reading it as desperate student politics. Bill Clinton has given Harris some pertinent advice. He said people are basically sick of all this paralyzing bad-mouthing. I think that what she ought to do, said Bill Clinton, is to pick the things that she cares the most about and she believes and go beyond what's been done. Now, say what you like about Clinton, he knew a thing or two about winning elections. And right now, it looks like Kamala Harris is not winning this election. Donald Trump appears to be the happier candidate with the momentum behind him. No surprise at his press conference in Mar-a-Lago this morning, he gave us more of the same.
Kamala Harris has obliterated our borders, obliterated. We've never had a situation like this. Decimated the middle class, and runaway inflation has caused problems, the likes of which we never thought possible. Bloodshed, squalor to our cities is common. and they've unleashed a war and chaos all over the world. You take a look, everything's blowing up or getting ready to blow up.
Right now, Trump doesn't need to change course. More of the same is working just fine. Harris has just 1 week to turn this around, and that's a reality that both sides can agree on. Well, in a moment, I'm going to be speaking to the CEO of Timcast, Tim Pool, and the former Ohio State Senator Nina Turner. But first, I'm joined by Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives. Kevin McCarthy, great to have you on Uncensored.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Just wanted to get your reaction off the top to this rally at Madison Square Garden. I was actually there. First rally I've ever been to of Donald Trump's. I must say, I didn't feel like I was at a Nazi movement rally. Did you?
No, not at all. I mean, when you look at this rally, just President Trump able to fill in New York, a blue state, not only did he fill the stadium, everybody outside. That was an unbelievable accomplishment. What really failed in this process is some staffer on Trump's campaign that allowed a comedian to go there. So you gave the Democrats an opportunity to try to attack it. But what I have found is here we are in the final weeks, the closing message. President Trump's on message. But if you are looking, Kamala Harris has spent more than $1 billion. I don't know the three things she would do if she was elected. Bill Clinton was right when he gave Hillary Clinton advice in 2016. You ought to get up to Wisconsin and Michigan. I'm seeing a lot of Trump signs. He knows how to win races. I think his advice is very clear to Kamala Harris. She has wasted $1 billion. She hasn't found her voice. It's kind of a desperation when you go to Nazis, Hitler, and all that, and it doesn't sell well. And when you start your campaign about joy and you have a whole convention about joy, this is not the place you want to end. This shouldn't be your closing argument. And it's a sign that if you're looking from the outside, she's not doing well in the polls, and it looks like she'll probably lose.
You referenced there the so-called joke by Tony Hinchcliffe. It was interesting because Jon Stewart today, there was a clip I was watching from him last night where he talked about this, and he put it in some context. So this guy is he's an infamous roaster. He was at Tom Brady's roast, and he said some stuff there which made this look like a tea party. So they kind of knew what they were putting on the bill. I agree with you. It was a pretty stupid decision to have a guy like that because that's what he's going to do. But having taken that decision, how damaging do you think it will be? I mean, there's a lot of people obviously getting very angry about the insult to Puerto Rico. There are a lot of Puerto Ricans, for example, in Pennsylvania. Could this kind of thing be genuinely damaging or not?
I don't think it changes any of the outcome. Look, President Trump has denounced it. He's not been a part of it. What it does, it takes away for how big an event that New York event was, to be able to go in there, go to California before as well. I don't think there's an undecided voter in America. Who's going to win is who brings out the low propensity voters. So what you really have to look at is the early votes. Republicans had been holding their votes back to only on Election Day. They're doing much better than they had in 2020. I don't know if the polls have improved, but if you take the polls from 4 years ago, 8 years ago, President Trump is in a much stronger place. If you look at whoever wins this presidential election, I hope they win not just electoral college, but they win the popular vote too, so we don't stay divided. When you win elections about ideas, you have a much stronger ability to govern. And I would say, look at President Trump's press conference today. He's talking about inflation, he's talking about the border, and he's talking about foreign policy. Those are really the top issues in America, and it's the issues that he leads on. And I think that's going to drive more voters. She's running a campaign where 40% of her voters aren't voting for her, they're just voting against President Trump. That's a hard way to win if you're just running against somebody. Presidential elections should be aspirational. They should be, what would the next 4 years look like? Where can you take America? And I think at this moment in time, that's a reason why President Trump is leading. But it really all comes down to Pennsylvania. You know, in the last presidential election, it was decided by less than 50,000 votes, 48,918 votes. That's how many votes President Biden won by because of the Electoral College. So there's no telling, is this another undercount with Trump? Are the polls right? And who gets the most voters out, especially the low propensity voters, because the intensity level is high on both sides.
was speaking to a pollster yesterday who said it's not completely fanciful that Trump could end up winning the presidency and Republicans could win not just the Senate, but also the House and the popular vote. That it could be a complete clean sweep. I mean, do you think that is realistic? Is that a possibility?
Is it possible? Yes, it is possible, because Trump will carry exactly what he carried last time, but he'll probably pick up Georgia. Arizona's looking very good. Nevada, unbelievable in the early votes. Republicans are leading, someplace that we'd be behind by almost 50,000 votes. But if he picks up Pennsylvania, the Senate, I believe the Republicans have already won. The House is unique, whereas we've won the last two cycles when Democrats were winning everything else. But it's easier to win for Republicans this time in the House, but unfortunately something has flipped on us. The Democrats have raised more money. And so it really could come down to where these candidates, there's about 20 seats that are about tied, and President Trump's, he's polling higher than the candidates themselves. He could pull everybody across the line, and it could be like a 1980 where the polls were very close, Carter was in the head, and you woke up the next day and it was a big sweep that, not across all those other ones, but Ronald Reagan won in a much bigger electoral vote than anyone had thought possible.
We have two things in common, Kevin, which you may not be aware of the first one, certainly, which is you were born 63 days before me in 1965. So you're going to turn 60 in January, 2 months before me. That makes me very happy. And the second thing we have in common is that after January the 6th, you were very scathing about Donald Trump. I want to play a clip from you at the time, but then I'll explain why I'm in the same camp as you. So let's take a listen to this.
I've had it with this guy. What he did is unacceptable. Nobody can defend that, and nobody should defend it.
I wrote columns and said on air pretty similar stuff. I'd had it with him too. I thought that this was beyond the pale. I couldn't see any way back. And I thought that was the last we'd probably see of Donald Trump in political circles. I was asked yesterday in an interview with me by somebody, well, what made you change your mind? And I sort of went into a quite lengthy explanation about why I think he should be allowed to run for president again and may well win. But what is your explanation? Having said he's done after January the 6th, how do you justify it to yourself that you're now so full square behind him?
Well, that's easy. That was a clip of not an interview I was doing. It was a phone call that they didn't tell you the whole answer out or the whole question before. I'm frustrated with January 6th. I don't support anything that happened on January 6th that day. But you also learned a lot more information after that time period. You learned that Nancy Pelosi was offered 10,000 National Guard troops, that I was the Republican leader at the time. The Sergeant of Arms never came to me or warned me. Pelosi never went before to knew where it was. They hadn't had the training. They had all the riot equipment locked in a bus before. So when you have the after look at what's happening, that day never should have happened for a lot of different reasons. The thing I think about President Trump, when you look at where America was, the standing in the world, and just the strength of America from an economy, from a border, from foreign policy. We've looked at the missteps in Afghanistan by Biden. We looked at 5 embassies being evacuated. Look at our base in Africa being given to the Russians. We're looking at inflation we haven't seen since the 70s, a wide open border. It's easy to see why President Trump's policies are so much stronger, and it also sees why President Trump is a more improved candidate this time, and he would be a more improved president, even how well he did the time before.
If he loses, and it's hypothetical obviously, but if he loses, would that be the end of MAGA as a controlling movement in the Republican Party?
No, I think the policies about MAGA, Make America Great Again. Remember, that started with Ronald Reagan. But I don't think the movement just gets handed off to the next person. Trump is very unique. When he ran, no one gave him a chance. He had not run for any other office before. That's just what's so unbelievable, that he can rise up and become president running against 17 other people. You also see all the attacks he has taken, right? They try to put him in jail. They prosecute him. everything they go after him. I don't know that anybody else has that willpower. The Republicans doesn't shift all the way back, but the Republicans are in a unique place. Like in the 1900s, they became a little more isolationist. I'm not that way. I think the president has united not just the Republicans, but all of America about the threats of China. You can't just give something away, what they've been able to steal. It's not the idea that we are capitalists. We believe in a free market, but we also believe in a fair market. You've got to let American products into your markets and can't just give America away that anybody can enter here. We all firmly have believed in an immigration system that actually works, but we believe in a safe border as well. I think those fundamental principles will stay, but I think we'll still continue to evolve and debate on the strongest of ideas.
One of the criticisms of Trump is that, you've had all these people that work for him, including a number of generals, who've now come out and said he's a danger, he's a fascist, etc. When you add them all together, it's a large group of people that were right with him through his first term in office. And his critics say, look, if even the people that were around him, who were of this caliber, are all saying he shouldn't be allowed to be at the White House again, then he shouldn't be. What do you say to those people?
Look, I have what I see from a lot in that first term. It's just like 10,000 hours. He had never served before, so he was just taking recommendations from people. It's not till his like a second year in office did he really get humming in the process of doing the job, understanding and knowing it. He knows it much better now, and he's got to have the right person work with him. And remember, he's trying to change an entire country that the whole establishment was working against him. No have we've ever seen when he's working with foreign leaders that they leak his phone calls, right? How do you build a relationship there? They create a whole fake Russia collusion part going after him the whole time he's trying to govern. I think this time he won't waste one day. I think he'll find the very best people will work with him, and I think they'll be more in sync. I mean, I'm a big believer in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. You got to get the right people on the bus, but in the right seats, and that's when you play and stronger, and I believe President Trump will have that this time.
Just finally, Kevin, on election night itself, what is the result, assuming it comes on election night, but what is the place you're looking for where if Trump wins, he's going to win? Is it Pennsylvania? Is it already coming down to that?
To me, it's always been Pennsylvania. I really looked from the very beginning, 3 states, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina. Kamala Harris has pulled out of North Carolina, so I think that's one's there. She's spending a lot of time in Georgia, so I'll watch Georgia. We've lost 3 Senate seats down in Georgia in the last couple elections there. So Republicans can lose statewide, but Governor Kemp has won very big. So let's see how those turn out. The early vote in Georgia looks very good for Republicans, but the one thing I've learned is you can't read on any of these polls. Then I'll look to Pennsylvania, the rural areas, what happens in Philadelphia, because that's where the Democrats get their big markup. And then what about in the rural areas where we go? Wisconsin is unique because he only lost that by 20,000 votes. But if you went back 4 years ago, Biden was leading by more than 6 points. So Trump performed over 4 points better. Then I'll look to Michigan. And all these are close Senate races as well. So watching those races, if he wins Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina and what he won last time, he doesn't need Arizona. He doesn't need Nevada. All that will be extra. So it really comes down to Pennsylvania.
And if he does win, there are increasing rumors that you may be his chief of staff. Would you take the job if you were offered it?
No. No, I will not be chief of staff. No.
Really? That was definitive.
Really, I don't want the job. I don't think that's the best place, and no, I will not be chief of staff. And personally, I think Susie Wiles has done such an extraordinary job. I would hope he would have Susie Wiles chief of staff. Think about this. Susie has run his campaign when he was being prosecuted, when he had everybody running against him. We had other candidates had more money. She kept the campaign focused. She brought him back and helped him win a primary when everybody was attacking him. She's done an extraordinary job putting a team together that doesn't leak, that has stayed on message. And I think from that point, bring that into the White House, and she has a long-standing knowledge of how to run organizations. You want the very best with President Trump, and I think that combination will actually make the nation stronger and the president himself.
Kevin McCarthy, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on. Love to come back sometime.
My next guest is one of the biggest podcasters on the planet, but he went viral recently after suggesting it might be time to quit. The founder and CEO of Timcast IRL, Tim Pool, joins me from West Virginia. And opposite him will be the former Ohio State Senator, Nina Turner. Well, welcome to both of you. Tim Pool, let me ask you straight off the top. There's a lot of activity on X today with big YouTube people, with big YouTube followings, all revealing that the New York Times has contacted them with a number of questions suggesting they've been peddling misinformation. I believe you are one of these. What's your response to what's been going on?
I don't think anything of it. These requests come in all the time. It is funny that they're doing this right before Election Day, about a week out. And it seems like, once again, they're going to try and push this narrative of, you know, only the New York Times and corporate news outlets are allowed to have errors or make mistakes, and often not even fact check them. In fact, I'll give you one really great example I love to cite. Politico currently has two stories live today. One stating that definitively Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election to assist Hillary Clinton, and another definitively stating that story's false and it's Russian disinformation. So if the corporate news outlets are going to, as of right now, be running fake news, everybody makes mistakes. The only thing I can say for what we do here is every story that we use is cited by a news outlet. So if they take issue with anything we are saying, it's our opinion based on the stories they write.
The irony of this, Tim, it seems to me, is this comes at a time when the biggest news story from this election in the last 48 hours has been this relentless attack on Donald Trump for being the new Hitler and for him holding a neo-Nazi style rally at Madison Square Garden, which I was at, first rally I've been to, and bore absolutely no relation to a neo-Nazi rally, not least because there were lots of Jewish people there and some of them had Israel banners. So to me, there can't be a bigger example of disinformation than trying to pretend Donald Trump is the new Adolf Hitler. Why are the people peddling that not also getting investigated by the New York Times? And what does that tell you about where mainstream media perhaps is in this election?
Well, we're seeing a lot of corporate outlets running this line, especially attacking Tony Hinchcliffe. And I think it's fair to say, if you've got criticisms of Donald Trump choosing to have a roast comic at his rally, probably not a smart move. But I think it's indicative of having very little left to actually make an argument about. I would prefer to hear anything in terms of plans. I mean, if Kamala would come out and say, definitively, here's one move we will make, I would greatly appreciate that. I can tell you about Donald Trump's arguments, whether or not they'll work effectively in terms of lowering energy prices, which could bring down costs of other goods. I understand what he's saying, and I think this is why we're seeing the polls shift in the direction of Donald Trump. Recently, there was a panel done, I believe it was Mark Halperin, where he asked undecided voters, and one guy just said he's suffering Hitler fatigue or Hitler rhetoric fatigue, and many of the panelists all nodded in agreement that that's all they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, Nina, I want to play the clip. So if people haven't seen it, it's been everywhere, but let's play the clip of Tony Hinchcliffe, who's this comedian who actually started the whole Madison Square Garden rally. And he said this about Puerto Rico.
It is absolutely wild times. It really, really is. And, you know, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. Okay, all right, okay, we're getting there. Now, again, normally I don't follow the national anthem, everybody. This isn't exactly a perfect comedy setup. There's some people here, all right, very good.
Now, Nina, there were two things about this that struck me. I mean, I was there at the time. It fell completely flat. I wasn't even sure what he'd said. I just heard the crowd reaction and thought, well, whatever you've just done, they don't like it and they're not laughing, was the first thing. So from a comedic point of view, it failed. But secondly, as Jon Stewart rather brilliantly pointed out last night, this guy, Tony Hinchcliffe, is a legendary roaster. It's what he does. Tom Brady's roast recently, which I think was a Netflix or Amazon special, whichever one it was, He just spent the entire time spray gunning absolutely everybody in an incredibly offensive manner, and everybody seemed to find that terribly funny. And Jon Stewart was like, look, I find this guy funny. Sorry, this is what he does. He said it's a bit like inviting Beyonce to your rally, and then she doesn't. And of course, the joke was she doesn't sing, which is what Beyonce didn't do at the Kamala rally. Can I just ask you, first of all, were you genuinely offended by what he said? And given the context of what Jon Stewart said about what he is, this guy, should we be that offended? Or was it just a case of he shouldn't have been hired for that gig?
He should not have been hired for that gig. Environment matters. So there's a difference between going to a roast where everybody that enters knows exactly what the comedian is going to do, and bringing somebody to a political rally when the person that is running, that being the former president of the United States, is trying to win over people from different walks of life. You just don't do that. Now, I will say I heard the gasp too. I wasn't there. You know, you were there. But when I first watched it, I was pleasantly surprised to hear gasp in the room. I think that is a sign that this guy was not accepted. President Trump needs to come out and say that that was not appropriate to that moment. He needs to apologize. I know that his campaign did, but it's a difference between the campaign doing something and having the candidate themselves. This man offended people. And yes, it was offensive because we have so much racial animus and tension in this country right now. It was ill-advised to have that kind of person there at that kind of rally. And I write about this in Newsweek. It'll be coming out today. I think it is wrong for Democrats or people who lean to the left to be comparing that rally to Nazis, to be calling President Trump adjacent to, or Hitler. They didn't even say adjacent to. It's wrong. And it also takes away the very American nature of white supremacy. We ain't got to go to Nazi Germany. This country has a long litany from chattel slavery to taking indigenous lands of having its own form of white supremacy and bigotry that we need to deal with. But to compare President Donald J. Trump to Hitler and to say that the people who attended that rally are akin to Nazis is absolutely wrong and extreme. It's very extreme.
You know, I'm so glad you said that, because I feel that very strongly. You know, I'm not a natural conservative. I'm more of a liberal bent myself. But I just find that constant use of Hitler and Nazis, given how despicable they were, given they murdered 12 million people, they put 6 million Jews into a most heinous Holocaust. The idea that there's any comparison between that and Trump, I just think is,
and Pierce,
it's appalling.
That's another
Tim,
point I want to make.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It minimizes.
Sorry,
I'm sorry for cutting off. It minimizes. It minimizes what really happened. You know, that's another. It's two things. One, it minimizes this country's history, and the other is it minimizes, to your point, what actually happened to millions and millions of people, and it's desperate.
Yeah,
it is a desperate narrative that further divides, and I'm really disappointed that my party would stoop that low. There are other issues to talk about. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about people suffering. But you don't have to go there to fight your political competitor.
Yeah, like I said, I'm so glad you said that. I mean, there was actually a Holocaust survivor in the audience. And the idea that he has to think to himself, wait a minute, am I at a neo-Nazi rally? Is just offensive. It's obscene. Tim, on the bigger picture, I just spoke to Kevin McCarthy, who's pretty plugged into the political scene, obviously. And he's very bullish about a Trump win here. He thinks it will all come down to Pennsylvania. But I was also told yesterday by one of the pollsters that it's not inconceivable, if you look at all the polling at the moment, especially in swing states, that Trump could end up winning not just the presidency, but the popular vote. And the Republicans could actually win not just the Senate, which is highly likely, but also the House as well. In other words, they could have a complete clean sweep here. Do you think that is a possibility? And the second question, would it be a good thing for one party to have literally everything?
Well, I think it's a strong possibility, but no one knows. I think everyone's guessing right now. If we look to 2016 and 2020, and then we look at today's polls, I'm not sure the results of 2016 and 2020 matter as much as what the predictions were as to what happened. So in 2016, there was a 3 to 5% bias among, on average, from pollsters in favor of the Democratic Party. That maintained itself largely at the national popular vote level with Joe Biden, though Joe Biden did still perform a little better than Hillary Clinton. He did win. Now what we're seeing is at the Real Clear Politics aggregate of polling, Trump is up 0.1. If any semblance of this bias still exists, that's indicative of a Trump popular vote victory. And then when you look at the swing states, it's actually much worse. 2016 and 2020 saw a Democrat bias once again, but this was ranging from even 4 to 7 points. Right now, Donald Trump is up on the Real Clear Politics average 0.9, indicating he's looking at a major victory across all of the swing states. But again, nobody has any idea what's going to happen. You know, a mistake I made in 2020, I think I was accurately looking at an increase in support for Donald Trump, but what I clearly missed was how interstate migration and COVID was affecting how jurisdictions could flip and could change. So you had many people who were moderate or Democrat leaning moving to more rural areas, and this shuffled everything across the board in ways I think most people didn't predict. Moody's Analytics at one point actually was predicting Trump was going to do very well in 2020. And then, of course, he did improve, but not by enough to defeat Joe Biden. Right now, Gallup, if you look at their polling of the most pressing issue and which party is favored to solve that issue, Republicans have the advantage. And if you follow this polling back to 1952, it is accurate as to which party ends up winning. I think it's fair to say, if you're looking at Polymarket, people are betting on Donald Trump to win. I also think no one has any idea what's going to happen, so everybody just needs to go vote. As to whether or not it's a good thing, well, it's always tough when you have single party control across the board. I'm not sure that even if Republicans win the House, the Senate, and the presidency, that they're going to do anything near what Democrats think they're going to do. There was a period after in 2017, a lot of Republicans were disappointed with House leadership not actually implementing any kind of strong Republican policy in the federal level. But for me and my personal views, I think it's better than not, although it really just comes down to I don't know what Democrats are offering strongly on policy. I know what Republicans have claimed. I know that largely I don't like the Republican Party, but there's a handful I do like. And all I can say is I hope that small sliver of more populist, pro-worker advocacy within the Republican Party wins out. And I hope there's less war. I hope we have a secure border. And I hope Donald Trump does bring more jobs back to this country. But I don't know what's going to happen, man.
That's very honest and probably quite right. I don't think anyone really knows. Nina, one of the battlegrounds will be over women's rights. Kamala Harris, and we saw Michelle Obama at the weekend as well, going very heavy on women's rights, why Trump is a danger to women's rights, why you have to vote for Kamala because of the abortion issue and so on, which is fine to a point, except that Trump is hitting back with a number of ads like this, which aired during the football at the weekend. Let's take a look.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
I suppose my question, Nina, is that can you look at people with a straight face and say, we are the party for protecting women's rights, as Kamala does, isolating abortion as the reason why they say that, but at the same time continue to support a policy that allows transgender athletes to compete in women's sport, which most people have come around to thinking is a grotesque attack on women's rights?
Well, Piers, I see this as a distraction. I mean, the question becomes, how often does this happen? It is a distraction. As I travel the country, people are talking about the economy, and that's from all identities, all backgrounds, all walks of life. I just really see this as another way to divide and conquer. And as far as I'm concerned, as someone who served in public office, have served people who serve in public office, you got to get to the nature of changing the material conditions of working class people in this country. transgender and otherwise. I mean, these surgeries and stuff, it is a distraction. People are still suffering in this country. And that's what I want to hear both President Donald J. Trump and also Vice President Harris talk about. And the people in the camps that just want to stir this up, it's just ridiculous. The othering of people is dangerous, Piers, and I am concerned about that. Distraction. This is not happening wholesale.
Well, it's
in this
interesting.
country.
Okay, let me pick you up on that, because you say how much is this is going on, and I've heard that before from people who try and say it's not an issue. The United Nations a few days ago came out with a really shocking report, which established around the world 900 women, biological women, have been deprived of sporting medals by transgender athletes. 900. That's not a small, insignificant amount. That is a very large number of people who've had their rights to fairness and equality destroyed at the altar, I would argue, at the altar of a lot of virtue signaling nonsense and a failure to recognize, this is where my position is, I want transgender people to have exactly the same rights to fairness and equality as a woman or a man or me or whatever. Absolutely. But I don't want to see women's rights to fairness and equality eroded in the process. And I think that's not an insignificant thing that can be dismissed as a distraction. And when you add to that the concern that women have about the invasion into women's spaces, you add then the issue of surgery, particularly of children, that's been going on. You know, we had this infamous clinic in London, the Tavistock Clinic, which basically mutilating kids legally, and has now been closed down, but irrevocably for some of the poor kids that were put through this. I just don't think that this is a distraction. I think it's a genuine issue. And I think it does make a slight mockery of Kamala Harris's status, as she puts it, as the only one in this race who's going to defend women's rights. Because Trump said, look, I'm not having any of this. I'm going to ban all transgender athletes from women's sport, which I think should be happening now anyway, and they should have either their own category or compete against their biological sex. But I think he's right. And I think a lot of Americans hear that and they go, yes, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, when people bring it up, but what I am saying, traveling the country, nobody has walked up to me and said, Senator Turner, you know what, them transgender, they're impeding on my rights. I'm not saying that what you're putting out there is not legitimate. Yes, long, hard fight for women to have access to sports and to do it in a way that allows women to compete. It makes me think about boxing. For example, in boxing, there are categories, right? There's welterweight, lightweight, heavyweight. I might be out of my depth with all these weights, but I think you both understand where I'm going. You know, maybe that is the way to go in this country where we set up those categories. A heavyweight is not going to fight a lightweight because 9 times out of 10, the heavyweight is at an advantage to the lightweight. So I get that. Let's have the debate. Let's have it in a way that does not dehumanize people. And let's do that also in a way that does not diminish the other needs that people are feeling, again, no matter how they identify in this country. That is where I am coming from. And when any party ascribes itself or makes itself to be the absolute defender of anything, now you leave yourself open to what they say, live in a glass house. You know, don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. I think both parties should care very much about women's rights, women's issues, but also the issues of every other person in this country, because most of the people that I am fighting for are working class from all identities, and working class people writ large are being left behind. So when I say it is a distraction, it distracts us from being at the core of the matter, which is material conditions in the United States of America must be changed so that people have the greatest opportunity. People who are not connected, people who are not part of an elite, people who don't have a trust fund, those people should be able to have an equal and great opportunity to live a good life. And the system is skewed the other way. That's what I mean by that, Piers. Not diminishing any concerns that someone may have.
Tim, what's your response to that?
You know, I largely agree that it is a distraction, but I would disagree a little bit in that the top issues right now, according to Gallup, immigration and economics. Are people able to buy groceries? Can they support their families? In places like Chicago, we saw a shocking report where members of the Black community said they felt like they were being replaced as the city was bringing in all of these illegal immigrants. These are the big issues that I see people talking about. But I will say, I don't necessarily think it's wrong to discuss the issue of gender ideology. I think Gallup ranks abortion at the 5th most pressing issue. I don't think gender ideology is close to that, but it still does come up in the news. For me, I live just outside of Loudoun County, and so it's a bit more difficult to escape conversations pertaining to this because, as some of you may know, the big story that came out of Loudoun was a young girl was raped in the girls' bathroom by a trans-identifying male. At least that's what everyone around here keeps talking about. And when the father comes in, he gets arrested. It's actually a really big deal for us here. So maybe it's more of a local issue. But I think the idea about, this ad where Kamala says she's for surgeries for inmates, it's not just about that one particular issue, which may be, are we going to give sex changes to inmates? That's a fringe issue. It's the greater picture of gender ideology, which, while isn't the top of mind for most people, the Wall Street Journal did call it a sleeper issue because it's underlying things. I don't think talking about it's going to win you an election. I do agree that running an ad is an attempt to throw Kamala Harris off base so that she's focused on addressing these lesser issues, still important to a lot of people. I think if this election is going to be won, it's going to be won on the question of economics. And I think Kamala has not articulated clearly enough what the actual plan is. I know she said opportunity economy. The response I hear from everybody all the time is, well, what does that mean? Trump's response has been fairly clear. We're going to deregulate the energy industry, drill, baby, drill, like a rhetoric. This will reduce the cost of energy, which will decrease the cost of transportation, which will lower the cost of groceries. I hear that. I go, okay, that makes sense to me. And then I hear Kamala just say, well, we're going to have an opportunity economy. And I ask, what does that really mean? On immigration especially, I don't think the conversation of, well, Trump killed a border bill means much to most people. The question is, for Kamala, it's a bit harder because she is the VP now. She has cast 33 tie-breaking votes in the Senate. What will she do today? Or why hasn't she done today what she plans to do tomorrow? People look at Donald Trump, and he has a bit of an advantage, and he's not been in this administration. So I think Kamala has to overcome those hurdles, and would agree largely with the gender ideology issue. Important, but largely distracting.
And Piers, couldn't we agree
just
that
hold fire a minute. Yeah, Nina, just hold fire, Nina. I'm just going to bring in another guest just briefly, Zachary Levy. So I'll come back to you guys for a reaction to this quick interview. My next guest is famous for playing the role, of course, of superhero Shazam in the hit DC movie series. But he's out risking the wrath of Hollywood by revealing his secret identity as a Donald Trump supporter. And Zachary Levy joins me now from Georgia, the country, I might add, not the state. Zachary, great to have you on Uncensored.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It's quite brave at the moment for any celebrity in the world to put their hand up and say, I'm a Donald Trump supporter. Did you think hard before declaring your allegiance? Or did you think, you know what, sod it, I'm just going to do this?
No, I thought and prayed on it long and hard. I knew that there were going to be ramifications socially and when it came to my business, my industry, it is quite a liberal industry. And by the way, I have many, many, many liberal friends that I love, and I know that they love me, and I know that they love this country, and I know that they genuinely very much care about what's going on. I think that there just happens to be a large separation and ultimately where all of us get our information, and therefore how we come to the conclusions that we come to. And as far as I was concerned, after thinking about it, praying about it, Tulsi Gabbard became a friend of mine recently. She asked if I would be willing to moderate a town hall with her and Bobby Kennedy, who I was stumping for very hard. I still believe that Bobby Kennedy would have been the very best presidential candidate that we could have had right now. But unfortunately, the Democratic Party made that impossible for Bobby. Trump and the Republicans did not. And ultimately, for Bobby and Tulsi to sit down with Donald Trump and for them to look in his eyes and for him to promise them that he really does want to make this country healthy again, and to fix the economy and to fix the border and all of these things. I do believe in the concept of triage. I think that it's one of the things I learned early on as a child. Like if there's an accident, if there's an explosion, you have people that are, you have some burns, you have some cuts, you have some broken bones, and you have some missing limbs. You've got to be willing to see every one of those as an issue that needs to be handled. I think, all of the things you guys have been talking about, these are all important things. We need to be able to address all of them, but some of them are just more important. World War III most important thing we could be talking about, potentially going into that. Right below that, I absolutely believe that the thing that is affecting all of us is that we have massive corporate corruption, specifically in big agriculture, big food, big pharma, big energy, big all of it. And because of that, we in the United States have been poisoned methodically, literally, through the food we eat, the water we drink, the air that we breathe. And that affects everyone. That's not just a woman's right. That's men's, that's women's, that's children's, that's trans, that's gay, that's black, white, Latino, Asian, that's everyone. And I think that these are things that we need to address. So listen, at the end of the day, did I know that I was stepping into the hornet's nest? Yes, but at some point you have to ask yourself, are you willing to fight when you see something that's this important? And I did not vote for Donald Trump the last 2 elections. I don't care for a lot of his Trumpiness. I don't. But we have 2 options here. And I really believe that of those 2 options, and like I've said before, I'm not just voting for Donald Trump. I'm voting for Donald and J.D. Vance and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and that entire unity party. That's what I'm voting for, because I believe that it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing that we're being offered. And I really do think they're going to get in there and they're going to clean things up.
Whoopi Goldberg gave you a bit of a whack on The View for all this. What was your response to that?
Listen, I've been on The View a few times over the years, and they've always been kind to me, and Whoopi's been kind to me. And I think that they obviously have their biases. And I think that when your biases are clouding your ability to see something in a more, I think, fair and logical way, that's unfortunate. For Whoopi to suggest that Hollywood is somehow a balanced conservative and liberal town is just not true. It's not. I mean, there are many people that are in Hollywood that are conservative, but you would never know that because they're not talking about it. They're not openly discussing that. And yet, if you are liberal leaning, you can talk about anything you want in Hollywood. So I just merely, not with any hate or malice or anything, I just retorted to that. And I said, I think that's an unfair assessment. I think that if you really were fair, you would understand that this is not something that's a very comfortable thing for someone like me to come out and do. But also, listen, I really firmly believe that AI is about to destroy the entertainment industry. I think in a few years, there will be far fewer jobs than anybody can even really wrap their head around. And so when I sat and thought about it, I was like, well, what am I really afraid of? I'm afraid I'm going to lose jobs that aren't really going to be existing anyway. That's not a good enough reason to not at least stand up and raise my hand and say, hey, guys, we have to come back to some kind of reason, logic, rational thought. I think that's what we've lost so much in our debate. We can't even sit down. I mean, I appreciate that you have different people of different opinions and different voices on your show discussing this, debating this. And by the way, and very subtly, I'm very impressed by your whole panel right now. This is not anger. These are people that are presenting their viewpoint, and they're doing it in a I think respectful way. That is what we're missing. And I think that when we are jumping into emotionalism constantly, because we are being told through legacy media constantly that this is a holy war, and that, like you were saying earlier, that this rhetoric of that Trump is Hitler and that all of his followers are Nazis, that is very, very, very caustic. That is why I think a lot of people on the left, very good-hearted people, are unwilling to even engage in the conversation because they're afraid that they are entertaining a demon. It's like, well, guys, hang on a second. We all ultimately want a lot of the same things. If we could just sit down and talk about that, I think we can come to some really amazing conclusions in how we could all benefit moving forward.
Do you think, Zachary, there are a lot more stars in Hollywood who are now leaning towards voting Trump than would actually admit it?
Well, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think there are a lot of people, in the same way that you see a lot of newspapers right now essentially kind of sitting out. Newspapers that traditionally would say, we are endorsing this candidate. And by the way, I mean, almost without fail, all of these newspapers have endorsed the Democratic candidate. The fact that they are sitting out is very indicative of a lot of liberals, a lot of Democrats are not impressed with Kamala. And listen, I'm not going to vilify Kamala. I think that to sit down and have a beer with her, she's got an infectious laugh, and I'm sure that she has a lot of niceties about her. I'm not going to attack her on a personal level, but she has not presented any solutions for what she is saying. Tim was talking about this. If she could just even bring together, like, hey, we want to help alleviate the economic woes of every American. And this is how we plan on doing that. We want to attack the border. This is how we're planning on doing that. You know, she's now saying, well, we want to go and do the things that essentially Donald Trump was already doing and that they were vilifying him for. I mean, that to me is very telling of a candidate that you have a hard time wanting to cast a vote for. And I do think there's a lot of people in Hollywood that would love to vote for a Democratic candidate because they really don't like Trump. And I get it. I totally understand. There are a lot of people that are voting for Trump that don't think he's the greatest guy in the world. But this is not, we're not looking for a spouse. We're not hiring somebody that we're working with day to day. We're looking for someone who has the chutzpah to be able to go and stand against the Putins and the Xi Jinpings and everyone else on an international level, and also have the balls to, you know, go and make some decisions. And I think that in his 4 years that we saw, that, by the way, a lot of people said it's going to be the end of the world. They were saying he was Hitler then, and it's all going to fall apart, and it didn't. It actually wasn't such a bad 4 years. And the last 4 years with Kamala and with Biden, I would argue, have not been nearly as good. And I think a lot of people see that. And so they might be, holding their nose while they vote for Trump. But I do believe that there will be a lot of people that will vote for Donald Trump because they see that, again, they're not just voting for Donald. They're voting for that entire unity party. And that is important.
You know, Dennis Quaid came up with a great line when I interviewed him about this, because he's done this new movie about Reagan. And he said, you know, Donald Trump may be an asshole, but he's my asshole. I thought that was just a funny line. Zachary, great to have you on Uncensored. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I appreciate it. Go back to the panel. Nina, I want Nina just to talk to you about the black vote in this election, because it's really striking to me that a lot of people have said Trump's the most racist candidate there's ever been, blah, 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 blah. And yet we see the African-American vote, particularly amongst young black men, rising quite markedly for Trump when his opponent is a black woman. What do you put that down to? We're seeing the same phenomenon with Latinos, but specifically for African-Americans, what is it you think? Is it them holding their nose about the fact that Trump may say inflammatory things, but actually he might be better for their wallets? What is it?
I mean, he does say inflammatory things and he does say racist things. People might not want to admit it, but he is definitely not the only one. My gripe with my party is there's a whole bunch of racism and bigotry within the Democratic Party too. So again, throwing stones when you live in a glass house does not make a whole lot of sense. But what President Donald J. Trump, in terms of the African-American community, African-American men in particular, is called choice. You know, and it just troubled me. It troubles me when people feel as though they cannot talk about their choices without fear of being vilified. It's wrong. We are supposedly in a representative democracy, a republic, and people have a right to vote for whoever they want to vote for, even if others do not agree. And do not get me started on the View women, because they take it too far, and especially when they call themselves chastising black men. Black men are the most progressive voting bloc of men in the United States of America. In 2016, they voted 81% for Secretary Hillary Clinton, while white men only voted for her at 32%. Now, again, black men have a right to have their choice. White men have a right to have their choice. Hispanic men have a right to have their choice, and on and on. Even if I individually or people collectively don't agree with the choices that people make when they vote, they have a right to have the vote, and they should not be bullied. I think bullying is a form of voter suppression. I don't like it at all. So black men, like any other man or any other men, you know, some of them are trending towards President Trump. But trust, Vice President Harris will enjoy the lion's share of the black community's vote, and that includes black men. And I say that in a chilling way because it troubles me that even if she didn't enjoy the majority of the vote, that I got to qualify this so that black men are not stepped over in the way that President Obama did when he called himself chastising them publicly. Why should I have to put a qualifier on this for black men in a way that I don't have to put a qualifier on for white men or any other man, that black men are going to somehow be vilified? And the vilification of black men, in my opinion, is the vilification of the entire black community because black men don't vote really much differently than black women. But even if they did, that is their right to do so. Piers, this gets me hot all the time because I don't like it. They're not the parents, the daddies or the mamas
honestly,
of black men. And it's a shame. You know, my brother is conservative and I love my brother. And we debate every morning, you know, over President Trump, over the Democratic Party, over Republicans, over conservatives. Every morning we engage in a debate. But I tell you what, Tony and Piers, if I needed a blood transfusion, if I needed a kidney, my conservative black man brother would be right there to give it to me. So I don't get caught up in all of this foolishness that Democrats are putting out. They're using identity as a blunt force object, and I do not like it. Now, the Republicans do it the same, but they just do it differently. Why can't these two just run for office, make their case, and not stir up this kind of venom? It's unfair, and black men are catching the brunt of it, and I will be here and continue. I wrote a whole op-ed about that too, Piers and Tony. Don't do that. Don't do that to black men. They don't deserve it. They deserve to be presented with policy like any other demographic of voters.
I want to add, I largely
You know what,
agree.
Nina? I think the Democrats. Well, Tim, I'll come to you. I just want to say to Nina though, it's so refreshing to hear a Democrat talk like this. It's like this is what the Democrats, I think, have been missing in this presidential race. They've been missing a bit of clarity and common sense and an admission that some of this stuff is just bullshit. Tim, sorry, I interrupted you.
It
Back
is.
to you.
And I'm sorry, the neoliberals don't like me. I just want to put that out there. And they vilify me all the time. And just because I point out some of the things we should do different. So they vilify me. And Tim, I'm sorry, I was calling you by the wrong name. But
no, it's totally fine. This country, I think this country, largely the younger generations, no disrespect to the older generations, but largely do not like racism. I agree with what Nina was saying. The example I like to use is after the George Floyd killing, support for Black Lives Matter saw an all-time high. But when the media started just defending rioting, the support for Black Lives Matter collapsed. I know there's a lot of people who have criticisms of the organizations, the fundraising and things that were going on. But I think you saw largely across the board, conservatives as well as every other demographic were saying, yeah, we don't like what happened to this guy. This is wrong. This shouldn't happen in this country. But then the goodwill is abused. So when we see calling Trump Hitler, it's an aggressive and mean-spirited attack on what most people would agree with if they were just compassionate about it. I actually think Democrats would make tremendous gains if they did address these issues, but they did it from a nice, a meaningful and compassionate way. Instead, we hear this, look, MSNBC ran clips of a Nazi rally while they're talking about Trump voters. And as you mentioned, there's Israeli flags there, whether you agree or disagree. I mean, this is an eclectic bunch in New York City. The message is lost. And it's unfortunate. It bums me out. I'm from Chicago. I want to see people come together. I want to see, one thing I often bring up to a lot of conservatives who don't realize this is that redlining and blockbusting still happen, even though they were made illegal in the 80s. But when you have all Trump supporters are white supremacists, Nazis or whatever, you can't have that real conversation about actual structures of racism in this country. It's unfortunate. And I think that largely drives young men, especially, to Donald Trump. Look, I like Trump for much of the exact same reason Zachary said. I would like to see a Democratic Party that comes to its senses. I supported Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard in 2019. Tulsi Gabbard's now here with Donald Trump. And I think she's fantastic. She's probably my choice for president if I was going to vote for somebody. I'm hoping, at the very least, whatever happens this time around, in the next 4 years, we can get some sanity among Democrats where they start saying, look, these issues and ideas that we're talking about actually matter to a lot of people, but it has to be done in a compassionate way that doesn't insult and deride the majority of the population. It actually engages them in an honest conversation. And that's true of how they're treating black men as well. There was an article in Huffington, I think it was Huffington Post, that said black men are the white people of black people. And it's just, that's a degree of absurdity that doesn't actually help people understand what's going on in this country.
Yeah, completely agree. It's been a great debate. I've got to say, I love the way that you guys have conducted it. Let me ask you, Tim, before we let you go, just want to play you a clip. This is from your show, which went viral on the internet. Let's take a look.
We had our 12th studio failure this morning.
The new one.
Yeah, the new studio failed. And, my attitude with that is kind of just like, if we can't make cameras and a computer work, And despite all the previous failures we've had, there's not a single person here who can make sure that either the studio is operating or secondary studio is operating. We've gotten to a point in the company where everyone's kind of just kicked their feet up and said, I'm doing what I need to be doing.
Yeah.
And then that just means I'm Sisyphus pushing the rock up. The problem is people are sitting on the rock. You know what I mean?
Now, Tim, speaking as somebody who walked off the set of Good Morning Britain rather infamously 3 years ago, I have a sympathy when things get a bit hot in the kitchen. But have you had time to reflect on that?
Yeah, you know, I guess maybe we all have our moments, but a little more context. I saw a picture of my daughter yesterday. And so she will be arriving on this planet very soon. She's already here, and I'm very excited for this. And the core of, you know, all of that conversation that was missing from it, there was a fear that I have with my family that, you know, if I announce I'm getting married and having a kid, it could cause security concerns. But with those amazing things coming my way, it means a lot more responsibility and work outside of running a business. So the frustrations I was dealing with was, you know, I'm over here trying to deal with starting my family that has been delayed due to running this company, and I refuse to put off any longer. So when it comes for me to a point where computers are failing, cameras are broken, I can't be the principal talent, the CEO, and a dad at the same time, and a husband. And so it was kind of maybe I can't do this anymore. Well, I had a conversation with some people. We've got some changes that are coming that are going to help us make sure everything can run smoothly, and that may include strategic investment so that I'm not going to be running day-to-day operations, can focus on my family, and then also do my morning and nightly show. So we'll see, but I think we got a handle on things, and it's a bit overwhelming, I suppose, but you know, being about to be a new dad and get married and all that stuff. But I suppose I could deal with it. The frustrations, they reach their point, but I think we've got a handle on things now. So, you know, what I will add that's really funny is the response to that is that there are these outlets writing that I actually don't have a family at all. And I just, you know what, no matter what you do, someone's writing something weird about you, I guess.
Well, I'm very glad you're staying because I'm a big fan of your work. I think your fans will also be delighted you're staying. And on fatherhood, I've got 4 kids from 31 down to 12, and I can tell you it's the best thing in the world. And however much you think you enjoy your work, and I love my work, nothing beats being a dad. So congratulations on that, and enjoy every minute. And all I'll tell you as a seasoned father is the worry never goes away. It just evolves over the years. And you worry about them when they're 1, and you worry about them when they're 31. But great to have you on, Tim. And Nina, great to have you too. I really enjoyed that debate. It was very civilized, very unusual for Uncensored at the moment in these febrile times, but very, very refreshing. So thank you both very much.